Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Corlick from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about the Xbox Series X. At the time this is released, Microsoft just put this console out yesterday, and if you missed it, I did an unboxing video, and I hope you'll check it out. Today, after having used it for a while, I'm prepared to give kind of my, I guess you would call it the initial review, and honestly, some suggestions for what maybe they should do going forward. This is nothing new. If you're familiar with my channel, I mean, I've done this for years. Every time a console comes out, I get super excited. I'm like, let's talk about it. Unfortunately, I won't be able to do this with the PlayStation 5 unless I miraculously find one because I was unable to secure a pre-order. So if you're like, dude, where's the PS5 unboxing? Sorry, it's not happening anytime soon, only because I couldn't find one. I want one, don't get me wrong, couldn't find it. So that's a different situation. But let's talk about the Xbox Series X. It's here. So here's the thing. This console I can really only describe as unique in that the uniqueness is both a strength and a weakness. Which is, it feels like the only console in history to come off as a physical firmware update to the previous console. Now, traditionally with game consoles, when you're going from one generation to the next, at least historically speaking, it's always been kind of a let's we're trying a whole new thing, and it's going to be this completely different exotic environment. Maybe some backwards compatibility or whatever will come with it, but for the most part, you're like, come on guys, we're going to try something crazy. Whole new names and whole new different type of media and different ecosystems and just different genres of games they're trying. You know what I'm talking about. If you're a gamer and you know gaming history at all, you'll know what I'm talking about. They just feel different. This doesn't feel different at all. And that isn't necessarily bad. It's just kind of that thing that makes it feel just like a physical firmware update is unique. And you can argue that that's actually a good thing because no other console has really approached it that way. But you can also argue that's a bad thing because it doesn't feel special. And in that sense, the positive that goes with that, though, is the ease of use, the convenience, which, of course, they're banking on because people love convenience. Convenience tends to win out. So I say this from the perspective of someone who is obviously, you see an Xbox One X sitting here. The Xbox One X is the console I use by far the most. On a daily basis, I turn this thing on for various reasons. And so it's the one I'm the most readily familiar with as far as its ecosystem and its quirks and all sorts of stuff. It feels like the whole point was for me to just disconnect this and then plug this in. I mean, down to the point where all the cabling is the same. Although it's highly recommended that you use the HDMI cable that came with this console as opposed to the Xbox One X cable, but it would work. You could just use it. The power supply is the same. It's the same two-prong figure 8 power cable that has existed on many consoles. Obviously, this uses it. The Xbox One X uses it. The Xbox One S uses it. The original Xbox uses it. The PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3 Slim model, PlayStation 4 base model. PS1, it would just be the original model, not the PSONE one, but you get what I'm saying. PS2, the one version of the Slim does it. It doesn't matter. The Sega Saturn, the Sega Dreamcast, a lot of retro adapters that try to take modern adapters for retro consoles will also use that same figure 8 power supply. I love that. I love that's so simple, so convenient, so usable. And also, like I said, it has obviously you could just connect the same Ethernet port. You could connect the same hard drives. The same HDMI cable. Again, recommended to swap it out. The whole point, though, just feels like take this out, plug that in, and your console is good to go. So once you have that up, we'll get back to some of those details in a bit, but once you have it connected, you're online and it says okay, we need a firmware update, all that sort of stuff, which we've just come to accept that that's what video games are now. You need the updates. Fine. Once you have that, it's okay, what's your account information? You plug that in your Xbox Live account. It's okay, cool, here's all your stuff. Also, we detected on your last console, here's all your settings. Do you want the same settings? Sure. Boom. And then you're in. And then it's using the exact same dashboard as the Xbox One X. So it truly feels, other than that initial setup phase, which isn't even complicated, it really just kind of feels like the whole point was to just unplug this and plug this in. And then at that point, it's like, you have an Xbox One that's more Xbox One-er. Like, that's how it feels. And I guess that's nice. It's convenient. It is definitely a faster and smoother dashboard experience. It's better at launching games, all that kind of stuff. But nothing about that feels unique to me. I mean, it's not supposed to. Microsoft made very clear that their whole thing now is Xbox is a brand that is meant to coexist on different platforms. It's not meant to be about unique special hardware anymore. So while I want to call that a criticism, I mean, they don't care. That wasn't the point. And if the point was to make it just feel like an updated version, like a physical firmware update, as I just said, then at that they succeeded. So let's talk about some of the nitty-gritty things. First, I want to talk about the design. A lot of people are talking about like, oh, come on, man, it's a unique design. There's never been anything like it. That's not true at all. There's another, granted, it wouldn't be me if I didn't bring an obscure reference, but the Japanese-only PCFX, released in 1994, which was the successor to the PC Engine and TurboGrafx 16, they had a very similar design. And look, I actually showed them both to you. How cool. It wouldn't be my channel if I did something bizarre like that. I'll grant you, outside of that obscure reference, yes, most video game consoles don't tend to look like a tower or a subwoofer, but, it is what, it's fine. I kind of appreciate the uncommon nature of the design, but to call it unique would not be accurate. But that said, well, that's kind of cool. It's not, I've noticed, and I'm not the only one who seems to be talking about this, the design is not really that compatible with a lot of standard TV setups. So in my case, again, they're going for, hey, take your X out of there and replace it with this. And you can't. Where I have the television, like the screen would be about here. So the X, it's fine. There's enough clearance there. With this, it's like you're cutting off a good chunk of the screen. So I had to prop my TV up on other stuff to lift it up high enough so there was enough clearance not to be blocked by the Xbox One or Xbox Series X, which was dumb that's necessary. Sure, I could move it somewhere else, I guess, but I'm a unique case because I have way too many consoles set up. But yeah, there's no great place in my system for this, so I had to lift up the TV, and then everything kind of felt like that was the point, that again, we're just kind of upgrading. I should also note, by the way, that because I'm coming from that perspective of someone who's been using the X, that's partially why I get that vibe. If you're that kind of guy who's like, oh, I've only had PlayStations or Nintendo stuff or whatever, then yes, this will feel like a completely fresh, different thing. But I also want to say, as someone, to give a compliment to this thing as far as like performance and all that, I am coming from this, but even this, I've tripped out. Like, my buddy Mr. Mario is a YouTube modder. He actually took this, replaced the hard drive, and put an SSD in it. And I gotta tell you, the Xbox One X was really made for an SSD. Like, it wakes that console up, it moves so much faster, so much smoother, so much nicer. Even then, this still feels like an update. It is a smoother, cleaner experience through the dashboard and the ability to launch games and all that sort of stuff. So that's a big praise. And one other thing, let's talk about some of the compatibility stuff. So it is worth noting that this is mostly compatible with all the legacy of Xbox One devices, save for one, which is the Xbox One Connect, which also therein eliminates certain game compatibility. But before we get to the game stuff, let's talk about hard drives. Now, what this offers you is a 1 terabyte SSD internal, but you really only get about 800 gigabytes of that practically, which is not uncommon. That's typically how they do stuff like this. It also has this storage expansion slot on the back that is really kind of designed for Microsoft's like proprietary external SSDs, which are expensive as hell and are going to be necessary probably at some point, but at least for now in the launch phase, not so much. It does have 3 USB ports, which allow you to connect external hard drives, but there's a huge asterisk with that, which is, yes, you can do that. In fact, it's easy to do that. Like, I took the hard drive out of this one that stored all of my games. Like, I have an external, even though I have an SSD in here, the only games I run on it are the ones that I'm actually intending to play. So I'll keep the external hard drive connected just for storage. And then it's like, okay, I want to play that game, spend a minute, transfer it over to the internal drive, and then we'll run there and you'll get all the load time benefits and so on and so forth. I rarely ever run things off the external drive. It's just there so that the games have a place to exist. Because I'm not the type of dude who likes to delete and reinstall stuff. And you can use that same mentality here, but in this case, it's more mandatory. Because you can run original Xbox games, Xbox 360 games, and Xbox One games off of the external drive. Xbox Series X specific games, not so much. They have to run off of the internal SSD. It is also highly not recommended, once again, to run games off the external drive. If you're going to play any one of those games, bring it over to the internal drive first for all the benefits that come with that, which includes things like superior load times and more stability, frankly. There's also going to be games where they're optimized more for the Series X, but that's more on a case-by-case basis. So I can't talk about that with any universal compatibility, but yeah, there you go. But yeah, one of the coolest things about that though is the external hard drive I have has like hundreds of games on it. I mean like hundreds, because it's got literally every Xbox original game that's compatible is on there. Xbox 360 games that I own that are compatible, a bunch of Xbox One games I've got that are compatible, and then because I happen to be a YouTuber, like devs just send you keys for stuff unprompted all the time. So a lot of time I just plug them in and I'm just like, okay, let's see what this is about, and if it's worth it, I'll go out and buy it, and which I do from time to time. And so I've got those just sitting there, and then all that Xbox Gold stuff. You know what I'm saying? It adds up. So even though I have an 8 terabyte drive, it's getting close to full. But when I connect that to the Xbox One, it takes a long time to populate to show you which games you have, and that's unfortunate. If once it knows that hard drive is there, it'll like be consistent. But if you ever disconnect it and reconnect it, it'll take its sweet time. However, that is not the case with the Series X. If you plug a hard drive into the Series X, even with that many games on it, a mechanical big 8 terabyte drive full of tons of stuff, it populates almost instantly, which is awesome. So that's a great plus. Aside from that, though, the user experience with the two consoles is essentially identical. This is just a bit faster. That's kind of, I hate to say it, but that's kind of all there really is to it. But there's other quirks we'll talk about, but as far as the dashboard experience, let's go with that. Let's talk about controllers. Now, the controller is very much the same as the Xbox One controller. It just has a few different changes to it. It feels smaller, although I measured and it doesn't really seem to be. So it's just something about maybe the grip. I'm not entirely certain what it is, but it feels a tad smaller in a good way. It feels tighter. It feels solid. I vastly prefer this D-pad over the Xbox One D-pad. It has an additional button on it, but you know, in general, it's the same basic thing. On the bottom, it still has your headphone jack and different connections for the other mic setups and all that. They did replace the USB micro port, thankfully, with a USB-C port. Now, I haven't seen anybody else talk about this, but it's worth noting that the controller comes with, they're still using AA batteries, which I hate personally. I would love rechargeable batteries, which does exist. You can get plug-in charge kits, which I've ordered. It's just not here yet. However, sorry if you're hearing sirens outside, that happens. But yes, so you got this USB-C cable. If you're the guy out there who's like, I don't want to pay money for a plug-in charge kit, but I hate AA's, what can I do? You can actually just take a USB-C cable, connect it to this, and then plug it into the console. Even though the wire is there, it'll work. You can play it that way. I know most people would prefer it to be wireless. I don't disagree, but you have another option. If you want to do that, it will function. One other thing that's cool about the controllers is, this kind of surprised me. The Xbox Series X controllers are not compatible with the Xbox One, which that part doesn't surprise me so much. It kind of should, because they're basically the same, but whatever, it's not compatible. But the other direction, they are compatible. This controller will actually work on the Xbox Series X. Now, I imagine that you should really only reserve that for original Xbox games, 360 games, and Xbox One games. Not so much actual Series X games, because while it didn't seem to have any issue with it for now, I imagine over time that could present a problem, but we'll see. Particularly because, again, the D-pad's a little different, so maybe on competition level that might be different, I don't know. But the extra button might also have different changes, but maybe it'll never be an issue, I don't know. But either way, it does work. So if you're that guy who's like, hey man, I got the Series X, I want my buddies to come over during a pandemic, which you probably shouldn't do, but I want them to come over and we'll all play games together as if it's 1997. Technically, yes, you could do this. Your buddies can just use an Xbox One controller. Let's talk about game compatibility. So this isn't an area where Microsoft gets credit and then some blame at the exact same time. It's like both positive and good. They gave us backwards compatibility, which PlayStation 5 didn't really offer us outside of the PS4. They're offering you the Xbox original library. At least the 40 games that were compatible with the Xbox One are continuing to be compatible on the Series X. They did a ton of Xbox 360 games for the Xbox One, also compatible with the Xbox Series X. And every single original, or God, this is why I hate their naming conventions, every single Xbox One game that was made natively for this console is compatible with this, save for one group, which is Kinect games. And I believe I mentioned before that it's compatible with most accessories, the Kinect being the big exception. The Kinect, they just decided not to support it. And I don't really blame them for that, because even back in like 2013, people were like ready to check out on the Kinect. So the fact that they held on to it as long as they did, some props for that. So, but honestly, that's a group of games I don't think anybody's really going to care about. It's interesting though, because you can still install the Kinect compatible games, but if you do, there's just a little like error on the screen. It's just like a little warning. It says like, hey, you can't actually play that. And if you try to activate it, you'll get an actual screen prompt that says like, this game requires a Kinect, which is not supported. So yeah, the Kinect games are not going to work, but boo-hoo, I'm not really going to miss those. The only loss of the Kinect, in my opinion, is that it was great for Skype. And the only other app that I thought ever used it well was the YouTube app, which actually had a search function. You know, obviously instead of typing out with the controller, you could just say what you wanted and that would work. That was the only app that ever seemed to do that. Like Disney Plus never bothered. I don't blame them because they didn't do it until a couple years ago or a year ago, whatever. Netflix never really bothered with that. But YouTube kept supporting that particular feature, which I think is cool. It's unfortunate that's gone. But small potatoes, doesn't affect most people. But yeah, where they could improve on all of this is that when they announced all this back at like E3 2019, they were talking about how backwards compatibility would continue to expand on the Series X. And I think a lot of us were expecting that when the console launched, there would be like, oh, here's a whole bunch more compatible games. There aren't. At least not yet. This is something where they definitely can work on this. I don't know if they're going to, but they could, and you could get more compatible games. Now, the question will be, will they be only compatible on the Series X, or will they also work on the Xbox One X? Because the way they kind of implied it like a year and a half ago was that the new ones would only work on Series X, but given their affinity for cross-compatibility, I find it unlikely. So I think it's sad to say this, but I think it's more likely that they're just kind of axing that program, because we haven't really heard anything else about it in a long time. So I would bet that even though they could probably start doing this, they may not. But hey, they might surprise us. I would love to be wrong about that. I'd love to see more original Xbox games in particular be compatible with this, but I'm not really betting on it. Disk drive. Now, I should have mentioned this earlier. Obviously, there's another version of this console called the Xbox Series S, which is an all-digital edition that looks more similar to an Xbox One X, because that's not confusing as hell. But that version, if you're thinking about getting that one, keep in mind that that is not the same on the hardware level. Like, it's digital, so it doesn't have the disk drive, which is, you know, maybe you don't care about this, that's fine. But as far as, like, graphical capability, it doesn't have the same power, if you will, as the Xbox Series X. So it's not going to perform the same way. So just keep that in mind. There's a reason it's $200 cheaper. Let's put it that way. And I'm never going to get one because I don't care about all digital consoles. They're irrelevant to me. So, okay, you got that covered. Now, let's talk a little bit about compatibility with devices. Now, as I mentioned, obviously, it supports those 3 generations of consoles, provided the games themselves are compatible. So, much like the Xbox One X, if you have a compatible Xbox original game, you just put the disc in and let it install. And the way it installs is it still downloads the game data from Microsoft, and it just uses the disc as an unlock key. That's still the same process. It is compatible with, I ran it with some other stuff. It actually does support Ultra HD 4K Blu-rays, which I don't think is surprising to anyone. It supports standard Blu-rays, it supports DVDs, and it still supports music CDs. Props to Microsoft. They're still supporting music CDs, which is cool. Now, so yeah, no real surprises in there. You know, it doesn't work, not surprisingly, with like things like the HD DVD drive for the 360, which there's no reason to think it would have. But yeah, that's cool. Let's talk about comparing it to a few other consoles throughout Microsoft's history. Now, I've got it sitting here next to... I'm going to keep mine laying flat because that's how I am intending to use it. But, you can compare it to the Xbox One X. And if we go further back in time, let's just run the gamut here. We're going to do the Xbox One S. You can see what that looks like for size comparison. And then you've got the base model, the old VCR Xbox One, which it's really weird how much their design changed over time for that particular console. The Xbox 360 the Xbox 360 Elite, not the Elite, the E. They were so bad at the naming conventions. Then there's the Xbox 360 S, which was actually my favorite version of the 360. Then there's the base Xbox 360. The original white one. Incidentally, the black version of this model is called the Elite because it had an HDMI port on it. And then we can go back to the original Xbox if you want, which oddly they only ever did one version of other than multiple colors. But yeah, that's basically how it compares to all those different random consoles there, which I think is cool. Another odd thing about this console is how it stacks with a GameCube. Look at that. Isn't that bizarre? It fits like perfectly. It almost feels like a conspiracy. But okay, it's like the perfect GameCube stand if you want to do that. Although I wouldn't recommend it because that's where it vents out the heat. Yeah. Also, here's another fun one. Take a look. Right now we have both Microsoft and Apple's latest generation game console. That's a fact. Like, those are the two latest video game consoles from both Microsoft and Apple. Anyway, moving on. But yeah, so a little bit of fun aside. Something else I noticed I want you to take a look at. You can see I'm installing Yakuza 7 here. Shout out to Sega, by the way. They hooked me up with this. But as I was doing this, the system wanted to do more updates, and it took a look at some of the games, and it pointed out that Borderlands 3 suddenly had a bunch of DLC and a bunch of stuff that it just started grabbing. But it also then changed it to an Xbox Series S logo. So it obviously updates to that extent so that it becomes enhanced by the newer console. It's interesting that it does that in that way. But what that means is that not only do you get the benefits of the game itself, by the new hardware, but it's also worth noting that it also tells you, like, hey, you can store this on an external drive, but it really can't be played until you move it to the internal drive. So if you have a game like that gets automatically updated, make sure you're aware of that. I'm sure what you guys want to talk about the most is like, okay, that's all well and good, but how does it handle like gameplay stuff? And the truth is, so as I said before, I recommend any game you want to take, you run on the internal drive. And with that, it didn't seem to, in most of my experiences, have any sort of issues with anything I was trying to run. It did crash once when I was trying to run Watch Dogs, but that was not from the game itself. It was like, if you ever used an Xbox One, you'll have noticed that issue where you try to run something and every once in a while it just like craps out and doesn't launch it. That bug, whatever that is still a thing. It's less common, at least so far, but whatever. But yeah, those games worked fine. Ubisoft was cool enough to send me copies of Watch Dogs Legion, as well as Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and a little indie company also gave me a game called Yes, Your Grace. So what I'm going to do here is I'll show you some gameplay, and keep in mind, while you're looking at this, we'll just go with Assassin's Creed first. And I'll just keep talking while you look at this stuff. Keep in mind that what you're looking at is not even close to representative of what the game itself actually looks like on a television. And I mean that because the capture device is capped out at doing it 1080p, and therefore a lot of stuff goes with that. It can't take advantage of the higher frame rate. It can't take advantage of the higher resolution. Or HDR capabilities. It can't take advantage of any of that stuff. So the footage you're seeing is like, yes, that is the game, but it's like you might as well be looking at like an entire generation behind. You might as well be looking at the game running on an Xbox One S. Like, it's not the same. But yes, they're there, they work obviously. But yeah, the game looks far superior on a television. It's a limitation of hardware on my end to be able to present it to you accurately. So keep that in mind. Now, as we continue to look at some game footage, there is something else that I feel the need to talk about here, because I feel that it's important to me, and that's kind of why I'm saving it for last here. And I know to a lot of us retro gamers, this is an important point. So just kind of listen to me as I talk while you look at whatever. People ask, what is this thing capable of doing offline? Because the modern era of gamers are very used to stuff being online all the time. They don't remember what it was like prior to that. They also, I would say, are not really prepared for the idea that the internet can stop functioning, or that servers can go down on consoles or whatever. And therefore, guys like me who are into console preservation, as you might have noticed throughout just the random obscure things I brought up in this video, this console, unless it is changed, will in no way survive that. And then there's that common argument of, but consoles are basically PCs now, and games require downloads even when they're on disc, and that's true. There is validity to that argument, but at least in that scenario, you have some element of it physically preserved. And while there's many games that, yes, will be completely broken in the future, there are at least some that survive because of physical editions. While this console does have physical editions, it may as well not, because the sad truth is it's pretty much online dependent. And they kind of did that quietly. Back in 2013, when they were talking about the Xbox One always requiring an internet connection, it was far more draconian, but everybody rallied against it and they stopped that. As a result, while you do need your Xbox One to go online for initialization, you need it for updates, all that sort of stuff, you can disconnect it from the internet and play games if you want. You can't do that with a Series X. I tried. All 4 generations of it. Xbox Series X games specifically don't work. Actually, they're the least guilty of this, because at least a Series X game will present you with the title screen for a second before saying, hey, you need to be online. Xbox One games do not work. Xbox 360 games do not work. Original Xbox games do not work. And this is something I detest. I find it disgusting that they do this, because there is no mechanical reason that I am required by Big Brother Microsoft to check in to see if I'm playing Star Wars Battlefront for the original Xbox, and that I need their permission to allow me to do that. I own the game. I own the console. The game itself is not online dependent. It does not need to connect to a server. Why are you, Big Brother policing, getting in the way and obstructing that process? That's my core issue with it. Aside from it just being a violation of what I would call consumer rights, it's also just kind of, it's anti-history. Like the idea that at this point, unless they patch this out, this will become a brick whenever it cannot connect online. And that can be for any number of reasons. That doesn't have to be the inevitable day when the servers go down, which is a thing. I mean, there was an article presented just the other day about how, I think it was, I want to say New York Times talked about this, that Microsoft in 2014 was this close to cutting off Xbox support in general, which is hilarious because I said that in a video back then. I said, like, this is something they're pondering. Nobody took me seriously. It's true. And I'm not saying that they're going to quit the Xbox brand anytime soon. I think they're still on board for a while. What I'm simply saying is, imagine if they had. All of that stuff would have just stopped working. And like all the consoles I brought up in this video, imagine if the Pippin or the PCFX, or the one that might be more relevant to you, the GameCube. Imagine if all of those required an internet connection in order to play the games like 20, 30 years later. How would that go down? Other than Nintendo, the other guy, like Apple certainly would not still be supporting the Pippin. They cut it off immediately when it was relevant. NEC basically doesn't exist anymore. Nintendo's around, but they cut off internet support. They're about to cut off support for the Wii U. I promise you, within like a year or so, the Wii U will be done. The Wii already is. You think they would have kept the GameCube going? I'm just saying that while Microsoft is the least guilty of shutting down servers for consoles, they will inevitably do that because either the console will be too old to support, they won't have any reason to do it anymore, or their business model will change. The goal is to kind of keep doing it until there's as few people as possible who care, down to the point where it's just us retro gamers who are like, well, that's cool, that thing's a brick, it's useless. Or those of us who care about retro gaming history are like, well, that's cool, but all those games are just dead now and they don't work and you can't play them. Honestly, to tell you the truth, had I known that that was the case going into the Series X, I might not have got it. In fact, I probably wouldn't have. And it's really a shame because I just don't, there's no real reason that that has to be a thing. Like, that can be firmware patched out, like, immediately. And I guarantee they won't do it, though. Because there is not any sort of rage around that one right now. Like, nobody really seems to care. So, I know you guys are very similar to me. That's why we all kind of exist in this same space here. But I want to give you a warning on that. Without an internet connection, and I say this not just like, you could have initialized the console, you could have installed the game, all the games, you could have installed all the updates. You disconnect it from the internet, either if you have it connected through Wi-Fi or just the Ethernet cable. It's done. The dashboard will still work, but any game you try to launch, you'll just get an error message saying you need to be online. Once again, sorry about the sirens. But yeah, I really hate that. That's one of the big disadvantages of living in a big city, is just random sirens. But anyway. So yeah, the one thing that's hilarious though is that when it's offline, you know what still works? Blu-rays, DVDs, music CDs. That all works when the console's offline. There is no actual reason that games have to not work. I'm serious. That's ridiculous. That doesn't have to be a thing. That's just them getting in there and blocking you from playing your games for reasons of wanting some level of control over it. And I don't really understand why. I could understand if the game you are playing requires an internet connection within the ecosystem of that game, like if you're playing on a game online, multiplayer, whatever, that makes sense. But when a game is completely offline, why does that matter? So yeah, I have a huge issue with that, and I really seriously hope they change that. So aside from that, like, almost deal-breaking issue, the other thing, like I said, is please improve on the backwards compatibility. And we'll see how that goes. But those two things aside, from like a hardware perspective and a user experience perspective where the console is connected online, keeping that in mind, it's solid. It's a logical transition from the Xbox One, and just feels, like I said, like a big just update, like a physical update. So yeah, I would say that you have to, it's funny because, like, on the one hand, this thing, if I had known it, I probably wouldn't have got it in the first place. But pretending that that's not there, then it's actually a pretty good console, if that makes any sense. So I would say a little bit of buyer be warned with that. Now, I don't have the PS5 yet, as I mentioned before, and I don't know when I'll be able to get one. But I'm really hoping that Sony took the high road there and did not require this same level of, like, online policing. Because otherwise, like, we're going to have an entire generation of games that we can't really easily access at some point. Now, the irony is the Xbox One X and Xbox One in general doesn't do this, at least not to the same extent. And because of Microsoft's desire for cross-compatibility, if you got, say, Assassin's Creed Valhalla or Watch Dogs Legion here, if you got any of these, for the Xbox Series X, they are actually, at this point in time, still compatible with the Xbox One, like the same exact copy, so you can just play it over there, granted not as a superior version of it, like the resolution's lower and all that sort of stuff, but it will work, and it will work offline. So, yeah. That's, I would say, if you're thinking about, like, hey man, can I get rid of my Xbox One and replace it, I would say bench your Xbox One, but don't send it to the locker room. You know, to put it in a sports analogy type of way. I'm keeping my Xbox One around because the irony is it will outlive it. It will outlive the Series X unless they patch out this problem. So there you go. Hopefully that addresses a lot of questions and concerns people have. I want to thank you guys very much for watching. I want to give a big shout out to, again, Bruce. There's a guy, it's not his real name, but he wanted to be known as Bruce. He actually provided the funding to get me this console. He didn't have to do that. He did it completely unprompted, and he said, I know you've had a bad year. Your mother passed away. It's been all this. It's been bad. So he just wanted to make it a little bit easier, and this was his way of doing that. Was he's like, go buy yourself an Xbox Series X or PS5. And since the only one I could secure was an Xbox Series X, that's what I did. But like I said, in hindsight, had I known this, I might have just said, like, I'll hang on to the money and then we'll put it towards the PS5 whenever that's available. But we'll see. We'll see. But anyway, thank you very much to him. Check out the social media stuff in the description too. Please follow me on all that stuff. And, you know, come to the Discord. Check out the Patreon, Twitter, feed, you know, all that stuff. Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Now, Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you all later.